Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Metroid Prime Remastered. In the last part we started off the game and now we're accessing the sort of major hub for the game by and large, the Chozo Ruins. Out of all the areas in the game, this is definitely the one you come back to the most throughout the game, and incoming scan data. Abnormal seismic activity detected. Seismic disturbance at ruin site. This is the game's hint system. You can turn this off in the options, but this is a somewhat contentious system to some. I'm only leaving it on so I can talk about it in depth, but first we got a new type of lore to talk about. That little weird puddle up there is a Chozo lore. Chozo script translated. The history of the Chozo stretches back into ancient times, so far into the fog of the past that we know not where our ancestors came from. One thing is clear, however. The Chozo who colonized Talonford made a conscious choice to eschew a civilization of advanced technology. We Chozo chose to live in harmony with nature, guided by the providence of the universe. We believe we will spend peaceful days here and plan to leave our words from time to time. So we're gonna have to keep our eye out for those, but welcome to the main part of Chozo Ruins. First off, come over here and scan this missile blast door because there's only a certain amount of blast shields you can scan in the game. That is a missable scan. So the hint system, I'm not sure if it's actually known what triggers it to activate and give you the next location you're supposed to go to. I want to say it's a certain amount of time or a certain amount of rooms you've explored aimlessly, quote-unquote aimlessly. By and large, it works the same way that Adam's hints work in Fusion and that the Chozo statue hints work in Zero Mission. They show you the room you need to reach, and as well give you a hint on what power-up's gonna be there, but they don't tell you how to get there directly. Usually the only way you can tell directly is if you've already gotten a map for the area so you can figure out what rooms connect to what. On a repeat playthrough, it's really not necessary, and honestly, I know some people are very purist about exploration, so they leave it off by default, but I think it's harmless overall, because some people might want that. Many long years have passed since we Chozo first took root in this land. The passage of time has always been a source of fascination to us. It is the belief of many Chozo sages that the truths of the universe hide within the tumbling currents of time's flow. Even as we search for answers there, however, we find illumination in other unexpected places. We know not how the abilities come to us, but recently many Chozo have begun to sense things beyond the realm of ordinary perception. Strange sights and inexplicable sensations flood our minds, filling us with visions. We take this growing ability to be a sign of our burgeoning harmonization with the infinite. Perhaps, finally, the universe's secrets are becoming known to us. I find the Chozo lores in this game interesting, because this was before we got the information about Chozos we have in Dread. Samus's reflection was here in the GameCube version, not here. We're a vampire now. Prior to Prime, we had kind of just a general idea that the Chozo were these wise, technologically advanced birds, and they are still technically overall. But the Talon Chozo in particular have a big, almost not quite hippie energy, but that's sort of the general vibe. And I find that interesting that they had ideas for sects of Chozo even this far back, even if we didn't get a lot more detail about that kind of stuff until basically Dread. Mind you, I'm sure that's more or less just a happy little accident and a coincidence more so than intentional in the case of Prime, but it's cool all the same. Get used to hearing recorded to logbook. There's sometimes you're getting that multiple times per room. Also, in terms of item pickups from enemies, there are by and large 3 levels. I think, for instance, with the health, it's in 10, 50, and 99 increments, whereas missiles, I think it's 1, 3, and 5. Maybe it's 1, 5, and 10. I wonder if something will happen if we cross this bridge. Nah, totally not. Time for our next boss fight here against the Hive Mecha. Security unit programmed to work with predatory hive dwellers. A design flaw makes the shielding on Hive Mecha weak around their access ports. These units are second-generation combat drones able to interface with organic units at a higher level. They train, shelter, and work with hive-dwelling predators. Unarmed, they rely on their hive beasts to handle any threats, and these beasts are another scan! These are the Ram War Wasps. Airborne predator circles its prey and then strikes. The War Wasps are the only species on Talonford to evolve a true hive mind. Nesting in damp, dark places, Ram War Wasps emerge in small groups when threatened and circle their enemy at high speeds, disorienting it. Striking from all sides as a single intelligence, they can fell huge organisms. So the way this fight works is that the ram war wasps are going to be circling around you, you shoot all the ones that are on screen until they die, and then the mouth of the Hive Mecha will open up to spawn more, but you can shoot into it to do damage. After enough damage, it rotates to the next mouth, and it spawns a greater amount of ram war wasps. Rinse, repeat, blah blah blah. This is technically a boss fight, but this game's boss fights are weird, in that only major boss fights get an on-screen health bar, which is a little different than how I think Prime 2 and 3 would handle. I think basically every boss fight there gets a health bar, and I swear I have memories of them having health bars here in this game, but I can't tell if that's just Mandela affecting myself, or if it actually did in just one of the other versions, because Prime does have a number of different version releases. I think there's like versions 0, 1, and 2, and then there's the trilogy releases, which are based on, I think, by and large, version 2. Like, for instance, in one of the versions, in the PAL version in particular, Samus has an intro narration at the start of the game, which is just kind of weird for the time. Can you take a solid guess at what this is? Because you're right. Missile launcher acquired. Like during the last part, press R to fire, press ZR or A to switch back to beams, and they can destroy blast shields. I recommend scanning that one if you didn't scan the one I scanned earlier, because you're gonna want that. And this here is our first energy tank, like in the main Metroid games. As I say this as if this isn't a main one technically. This increases your health by a total of 100 from 99 to 199, so you just have more health. And something I can't tell if it was in the original, because it's been a while since I played the original Prime, you can actually see the total amount of energy tanks you can get on the top amount of the screen, just because it's about the same length as the health bar. If that detail was there in the original game, it's just because my TV, when I last played the original Prime, just was too low def to show that, which is an honestly pretty likely trait. So now that we have missiles, we can backtrack a little bit here and go destroy all the blast shields we saw on top of some other things to allow us to progress a little bit. On top of that, you can now destroy main War Wasp hives. Not that that matters in a lot of cases, but it gives you an attack option, I guess. But before we do that, you might have seen these blast caps earlier, but you can destroy them with missiles. Just be careful of the poison gas they leave behind. But this also allows us to come here and look at this brimstone wall. If you ever scan something with a red scan icon and it says it's made of brimstone, missiles can destroy it. There's a couple things not marked with brimstone that can be destroyed by missiles, but by and large, that's how it works overall. And that gives us our first missile expansion. 5 missiles per, max of 250. This is a 100% playthrough, so we're getting a lot of items. With that said, item collection in this game is pretty much the same as it was in the 2D games, but it's a little different at the same time. The items are always in the same place, of course, but because we don't have map markers showing you where an item is in a room, you just kind of have to figure it out based off earshot, because whenever you're near a power-up, if you listen carefully, you can hear a low, vibrating, rising, and lowering humming sound effect, like a little... By and large, there's only a few items that don't make that sound loud enough for you to notice in some cases. If you're good about listening in and honing in on that, you can probably find most of the game's items. You can also grab most of the items in this game along the way. There's only really a couple of items that are super out of the way. Thankfully, this game is closer to Super Metroid in that regard than Zero Mission or Fusion. Which, even though I prefer Fusion and Zero Mission overall as games to Super, that is something I really like that Super had going on. And I'm kind of sad that they've never really gone back to that, barring Prime 1 and I guess Prime 2 overall since. I guess Prime 3 you can do it as well now I think about it. So our main goal over here is to take care of this blast shield over here, because this allows us to go grab our next power-up. The game does a pretty good job about sizing its areas to the amount of power-ups you have. You only really maybe have one idea of an idea where you can go at the start, but then as we get more and more power-ups, there's more and more areas we can go to open new pathways, and I like that a lot. Oh boy, more beetles. It's not like I've already killed, I guess technically only like 3 or 4 of these things, but you can just mash the ever-living shit out of the fire button and they should go down pretty quickly. This is also probably going to be the first time you can actively use circle strafing actively, but I'll talk more about that in a moment, because once we take care of all these beetles, well, Mama's angry. Next mini-boss, this is the Plated Beetle. While armor burrowing insect, vulnerable only in the rear abdomen, creature's thick cranial plating can repel frontal attacks. This gives it an advantage in combat, allowing it to make ramming attacks. Only surfacing when it detects vibration above, it then maneuvers itself so as to always face its rival, keeping its exposed abdomen protected. So, obviously this thing's got a giant glowing kill me light on its butt, but we need to get behind it, and you can just kind of let it charge in one direction. You can probably hit it that way, but this is where they introduce the stash. If you're locked onto a target, you can tap the B button, tap, not hold, to jump a good distance around the enemy, allowing you to circle strafe them and do some pretty good damage really quickly. There's not many enemies use this to get behind actively to do damage. It's more so used to dodge attacks overall. It's your main combat utility besides firing. Ah, old reliable Morph Ball. Press Y to activate Morph Ball. You can roll around on the floor. You're smaller, so you can enter round passageways. It's the main Samus ability. You know this. Even if you played Smash Brothers and never played a Metroid, you remember the Morph Ball and the missiles. So now that we have this, if you were paying attention back where we got that energy tank, there was a small passageway behind that we can now go use. We'll start seeing this, I think, a little bit next part. But eventually I am gonna, like, speed up backtracking if there's no major item pickups along the way. If only just to make this LP not drag on for, like, 20 parts. By and large, you can get around in this game pretty quickly. I'd say at most, backtracking can take about 8 minutes to get from one far end of the map to the other. Most of your smaller backtracks through an area are probably going to be between like 1 to 4 minutes overall. Again, Samus moves at a pretty good rate in this game. I see another Chozo script. The surges of negative energy brought by the meteor far exceed our expectation. We Chozo have yet to find a way to rid ourselves of the great poison. All we could do now is seal it away and wait for the day when a power to purify the poison appears. However, it is already impossible to collect all the pieces of the great poison, as it has already spread, seeping into the planet and hardening. Great poison? Huh. Well, speaking of poison, be careful of any water here in Chozo Ruins, because for the moment, it is poisonous. It will just damage you outright. I think the damage rate is consistent, unlike certain other hazards of the type in the game, which will accelerate their damage the more you're in it. But just by and large, stay out of it. Those were Shriek Bats, by the way. They charge at you, and that's about it. But the main thing about them, whenever you're in a small hallway like that, you can actually use those areas to grind up for health if you need to. Enemies in this game respawn, I think, after you've gone about 2 to 3 rooms away. So if you're in a smaller area, you can use those buffer hallways, essentially, to just continuously kill the enemies within, go a couple rooms, kill more enemies, then come back and get more for health. Not that you really need to, because by and large, health's not a big problem in this game. Every save point fully restores your HP. Missiles are technically the bigger thing to look for in that regard, because you need enemies to drop that. There are missile refill stations, but there's only, I think, like 2 or 3 in the game period. So a moment ago, I brought up going back to that energy tank, and on a first playthrough, that's probably what you're going to do. But the way I'm handling this LP is I'm trying to get through the game as fast as I can and get as many items as I can while making the progression as streamlined as I can, if that makes sense. I'm not gonna, like, faff about, go to a dead end that you need to hit, and then go look for the power-up you need for the dead end. That's more of a Metroid Prime 3 kind of deal, actually. One of my goals in this LP was to make it so that the hint system would be on, but seldom show up, if at all, barring the required seeing of it when you first reach Chozo Ruins. Am I successful at that? Sit down and find out. Now, in this room, really quick, we want to actually activate our scan visor and scan that door in the distance. This is another research log. This is a locked door. That is a separate scan, and it is very limited in availability. The last locked door I can think of is about Technically at the end of the game, because one of the last bosses, their door locks as well. But it's easy to miss that because of how often you're probably not looking at doors when the doors are actually locked. So make sure you grab that while you can. Do you guys want another mini-boss? I love this song. This is the Incinerator Drone, programmed for high temperature waste disposal. Device schematics indicate a high risk of malfunction when the internal power core is damaged. Unit has minimal combat programming, but can defend itself if necessary. This drone's intense heat blasts compensate for its lack of battle prowess. So the way this fight works, the fire bars are going to rotate around the room, alternating between high and low the more damage you do, and eventually the core will show up, which you need to either shoot repeatedly or use a missile on. At that point, it'll cook the hive above it, and another type of war wasp will spawn. This is also a missable scan. This is the barbed war wasp, an airborne insect with the ability to launch its stinger at prey. A highly aggressive member of the war wasp family, this insect can propel the tip of its stinger up to 20 meters. The stinger tip regrows seconds after launch and contain an acidic compound designed to pre-digest prey. The game is kind of weird with its missable scans in that some of them are very front-loaded, but then after that for a while it's just a bunch of mini-bosses and bosses until a very notable period in the fourth area we explore, where there's like 5 to 6 enemies in a row that are only there for a short time. And I guess I'm getting kind of ahead of myself here. The game does actively change what enemies are in certain rooms the further into the game you get. For instance, the first main big room of the Chozo Ruins here that we got into at about the 1.5 minute mark of this video, if even. The beetles in there are eventually going to be replaced by a Plated Beetle. The Plated Beetle is not a missable scan, whereas this is. Mind you, the logbook doesn't matter too much, so don't worry if you miss a scan, and even then, and I'm getting really ahead of myself here, if you do miss a scan, you can just load your save file after you've beaten the game, and you can start a new game plus of sorts. You aren't able to keep all your items, but your scan book stays intact, so you can go get the missable scans on the second one. Good old Morph Ball bombs. You get in Morph Ball mode and press the fire button, and you can lay up to 3 in a row. With that said, they actually do show how many you have left to place, and when they recharge up on the top there. On top of this, since we're playing the remastered version, there's a little extra ability we get with this. We get the Spring Ball. This was added into the trilogy release of Prime 1 and 2, because it was natively in Prime 3 by shaking the Wiimote. Weirdly, having the Spring Ball just speeds the game up because you don't have to wait for bomb jumps that are 1 bomb jump high. You can still do multi-bomb jumps, but because you only have a max of 3 bombs at a time, you can only do a double bomb jump in this game. It's not like, say, Super or Zero Mission, where you can just bomb jump upwards infinitely if you place things and time things properly. So, I technically don't need to do this for a while, but in this room we got a giant timed puzzle where we need to enter these slots that the Morph Ball can enter, place a bomb, and then get to the next one before the time runs out. That's what that little beeping sound is. It's the timer. The closer it gets to running out, the faster the beeping gets. Also something I forget to do for a long while. Scan the Morph Ball slots. That's another research log for the scan book. There's a couple of scans I just forget to do for a while because in my brain, they're so basic an idea that they don't have a scan log. Like, you can't scan just a basic door. You can only scan specialized doors. So why could I scan a basic Morph Ball slot? And I've always found the way they railroad you into getting the bomb kind of funny. You need to blow up that stone toad enemy, and they can only be damaged from within. So you need something that explodes from within, and then they just pop like a balloon. That's really squishy. Ew. So I'm doing this puzzle now. I don't need to do this puzzle for a long while. You don't need to go in the direction I'm technically heading right now. Almost for like another 3 or 4 videos worth, I'd say. I'm mainly going this way because it allows me to grab an energy tank now rather than later. Because having as much health as you can in the early game is technically pretty useful. Because enemies in this game, they do fair damage. Not a whole lot of damage, but fair damage. If anything, it's like the next major boss that I'm really afraid of potentially dying to. Dying in this game, by the way, is old school punishing. You're sent back to the title screen. You have to reload your most recent save. Thankfully, the game usually places save points at a pretty decent pace, and I recommend just using one whenever you see one. I mainly ignore a lot of them in this LP just for the sake of going faster. I mainly will use one if I'm probably like low on health or something. Now that we have the Morph Ball bombs, though, I can now go get another power-up that you can technically get before the Morph Ball bombs. I just waited until after because there's a expansion I can get right near the next power-up if you have bombs, and I just didn't want to have to backtrack to this room. At the time, I would have to at that point. Though, technically, I could have waited to get this for a long while, because with the current setup of items I'm getting in here, missile expansion there, by the way, I'm coming back to this room a total of 2 times after this required visit to get all the items here. You could theoretically wait until we get a particular underwater ability. But we got a bit of a puzzle in here. There's 4 runic symbols that you need to scan in order to activate them. They're not super well hidden, but they might trip you up on a first playthrough only because you might not think to destroy these blast caps or look up at a certain angle. By and large, Metroid Prime doesn't really have hard puzzles. It really does come down to blow this thing up or scan this other thing. The only real hard puzzle comes down towards what this game's end game is like, and we'll be talking about that as well in several parts. More on that later. Right now, our goal is to just explore the Chozo Ruins. In fact, now that I think about it, talking about the hint system a little bit, I don't think I've seen hints for maybe like half the items in the game, especially here in Chozo Ruins, because you get so many of them in such a quick fashion. There's one I can think of that I've definitely seen the hint for, but that's because that one has a pretty meaty backtrack to get back to. Ooh, more Chozo lore. Disaster struck suddenly. We had a vague, dark foreboding and it became truth. A meteor appeared from nowhere, casting a dark shadow of debris over the land with the violence of its impact. Its destructive force spent, the fallen star burnt itself out rapidly, and the incident should have faded from memory. But the meteor brought with it corruption. A great poison spread forth into the land, a strange energy that clawed at natural life with a ferocity. That strange negative energy emitted from the meteor expanded to encompass Talon 4 in a night, as a spider weaves a web. I guess that's the great poison in question. Ah, good old charge beams. Now all we're lacking is our Various Suit and our grapple beam, and we'll be back to full force from the start of the game. The charge beam can destroy certain things that the missile can't, but by and large they have the same purpose. They're your main damage dealers against a lot of bosses and enemies. I tend to use the charge beam more often than not. In fact, there's probably going to be a lot of cases where I'm just walking through an area and holding a charge beam because it gives my one finger something to do. But you can really just spam the fire and you're going to be fine for most normal, small enemies. It's things that need concussive force like the missiles that you're probably going to need to use the charge beam on, like this grate. Again, if I wanted to get everything here in as few visits as possible, I could come get the charge beam because you do need to get that to actually finish the game. And then I would just not get this missile tank we just got until way later because there's 2 other items in this vicinity we're going to need to backtrack for. But I want as many missiles as I can early on. I'm trying to streamline in general, but there's a few cases where I'll just go out of my way because it's going to be worth it in the shorter term overall. Especially because doing rapid-fire missiles against a lot of bosses is just going to be the fastest way to kill them, on top of normal enemies. You can almost gauge what enemies you should use missiles on, though, based off their size. Like, if they're about Samus's height, you should probably use missiles, otherwise use, like, charge beam or just normal attacks. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 3, we're going to wrap up our main business here in our first visit to Chozo Ruins and then move on to our next area. See you guys then.